excited today. I have been trying to interview Dr. Jonathan Stea for 2 years, maybe 3. He's one of those dudes that, you log on to Twitter and you watch him. It's like Jon Snow taking on the Horde. Just battles medical disinformation literally all day long. That's what he does. And he has this incredible ability to be able to kind of see the forest through the trees when it comes to disinformation, misinformation, and some bad actors who like to tell you that, this dirt pill is going to help. He's battled for 3 years as a practicing clinical psychologist. He's also an adjunct professor, University of Calgary, in the addictions mental health department. He practices CBT, supports people with severe mental disorders and addiction problems. And he's one of those dudes who I'm like, yeah, God, everything he says is right on. And he's taken a ton of heat over the past couple of years, being on social media, advocating for evidence-based treatment in the age of ivermectin threats, death threats. Through all of it, he's maintained a sense of humor, and he's written a brand new book and just finished it. We're going to talk about it today. Mind the Science, saving your mental health from the wellness industry. And this is what he does on his spare time. If he's not helping people understand their addiction and their mental and emotional health and helping them get better, he's helping people navigate the weird roadmap of evidence-based science versus Fugazi science, chakras, that kind of horse shit. I'm a huge fan of some alternative medical treatments. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about addiction. We're going to talk about depression. We're going to talk about Jordan Peterson. We're going to talk about his new book and why it should benefit you to read it. So without further ado, brought to you by my friends at Moment Mushrooms. Go to momentmushrooms.com today and experience help, health, and education and understanding microdosing, what it can do for you. They're in Canada and they want to help you. That's what they're here for. All you have to do is email them and they will be in touch with you. I microdose, so should you. Get better, get healthy, get well. Go to momentmushrooms.com today. Without further ado, here's my friend and yours, Dr. Jonathan Stea. It's great to have you, though. Nice to finally meet you. How long did I chase you around for this interview? Do you remember?
Good 2 years, two and a half years.
I've never been given the Heisman by a guest or a human being more than you. But it was like, it was funny because the pandemic started. Everybody's on Twitter. I'm farting around looking for voices in the dark night sky trying to usher me through the mung of social media and shitty takes on, healthcare and lockdowns and stuff like that. And I'm like, this Dr. Jonathan Stea guy, he's from Calgary. He's a Canadian. I trust what he's saying. And everything he said was evidence-based, makes sense. As I start like trying to get a hold of you. I'm like, hey, dude, you want to come on the podcast? And you're like, really appreciate you asking. But no. And I'm like, okay. All right. And then, you'd see you ramp it up again. You're doing God's work out there. You're fighting misinformation, disinformation, pseudoscience takes, talking about evidence-based science. I'm like, I love that guy because I'm doing the same thing, even though I'm not a doctor. You're a clinical psychologist, adjunct professor of psychology, psychiatry. And I'm like, okay, well, that guy's got credentials. And then I start watching people tear down your credentials. And I'm like, I need to talk to this guy. And I'm like, hey, you want to talk about the heat you're taking? And you're like, no, not right now.
This is exactly how it panned out. I love this.
It is. It's true, though. That's like a really good, because what people don't know is I think there's some people on Twitter. You might have some kind of following, significant or not, whatever you call significant, who connect with people on certain things, right? And then you see them fighting their battles online, but you don't know how many of us are talking to each other in the background, do they? Nobody really knows.
No, it's happening all the time. And Dean, I know I said it before, but I do really appreciate your patience. And I mentioned to you before, I grew up in the Toronto area and grew up listening to 102.1 The Edge. And I told a few buddies that I'm talking to you today, and I quote, they said, legendary.
Legendary. You tell them they're absolutely right. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, dude. It's awesome to hear that from everybody. I think there's mutual admiration for people that have long careers and do a publicly facing job. Something you've done. I want to get into it with you. Really appreciate you finally taking time. You got a book out, which you did inform me when I was chasing you around like a mad dog, saying, "Come on the show, come on the show." You're like, "Wait till the book comes out. Wait till the book comes out." You got a book, Mind the Science, and I want to get into that today. It's like a culmination of your experience, and not just professional experience, but online experience, pandemic experience, COVID experience, wellness experience. But I want to get to lay some tracks here, if you will. Clinical psychologist. Is this something that an evidence-based, we'll get into all that stuff. Is this a career that you saw yourself in? I finished reading your book, and obviously you give some backstory about wanting to get into the profession that you're in. But take me through that journey, if you will, and what brought you here.
Totally. I mean, thanks for asking.
My pleasure.
I was a nerd kind of growing up. I just sort of, started taking philosophy at the University of Toronto, philosophy of science. And then I realized I can't do anything. Well, I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to be a philosophy professor. So I just began founding my feet in the world of psychology, where I can actually apply science to helping people, and especially people that were experiencing mental disorders. So that's kind of what got that sparked my interest. And so I began working there. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Toronto, and then flew out here to Calgary to do a master's and PhD. And I've been working ever since full time in a hospital setting, helping people who experience concurrent addiction and psychiatric disorders. So that means that people come to the clinic and to our hospital. They've already had some treatment before, and we usually see people with severe addiction and mental disorders at the same time. And I get to work on a really amazing, what we call interdisciplinary team. So there's other psychologists I work with, but also social workers, psychiatrists, addiction medicine physicians, and nurses. And so we do things like one-on-one therapy, group therapy, medication management, and kind of just case management, helping them kind of navigate our systems and get the supports they need. So that's my full-time day job. And then at the side of my desk,
side hustle. Psychologists and professors all have side hustles, I've noticed. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. The side hustle has been, like you said, just going online and just fighting all the crap that's been out there. Just so much misinformation, so much health misinformation, mental health misinformation, and it blew up during COVID. And so that's where we met.
It is where we met. And thanks for the backstory. Let's get to that. This is a culmination of your professional career. Obviously, the pandemic really sped this book up. It's called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from Wellness Industry. And I found that tagline after the title specifically very interesting, because we live in a time where pseudoscience is a big deal. And depending on how you wrap up misinformation, pseudoscience, depending on what doctor you've paid enough or naturopath you've paid enough to say something, I mean, there is information out there that gets wrapped up and looks like it came from a peer-reviewed study, and you can trust it. And I think that this is one of the things that I really want to kind of start with, because it really leans into the book. We'll get into the trolling. We'll get into the experts versus idiots. We'll get into how you battle that personally and professionally. But I want to start with the book. What made you write the book? Was it COVID? Were you always interested in trying to explain the difference between, for a lack of a better term, bullshit science and, alternative treatments, of which I'll challenge you on some of them. And I want to have a conversation, because I do believe in some of the ones that you call gray areas, according to your book, which is fantastic. Just fed it. But take me through the genesis of what made you want to start this. Was this a revenge play? What was it?
Well, so psychologists have a code of ethics, and so one of our code of ethics is having a responsibility to society, which basically means promoting and practicing evidence-based care. The converse, or the opposite of that, is also correcting misinformation in the public, and that's to protect the public. And so I consider that, all that to say, I consider that part of my ethical duty. And so my ethical and professional duty, and so I actually started going online to correct misinformation about the nature of cannabis addiction. Because you take an oath, right? Is it a Hippocratic oath? Do psychologists, psychiatrists take the same oath? It's a code of ethics that you
sign and agree to, evidence-based treatments.
It's called an aspirational code of ethics, but then we also have what's called the legal standards of practice, and that's what we're legally obligated to. So our licensing bodies and our regulatory bodies make sure that we're following evidence-based practice, because if we don't, we can get into trouble. So there's ethics, and then there's actual legal standards of practice. And so I guess I started doing work on the nature of cannabis addiction, because that was my dissertation work. So I would write articles for CBC and Scientific American, just trying to bust myths around cannabis, because I would treat a lot of patients who came to us with the cannabis addiction. And what they would say is, well, people are telling them, hey man, it's just it's just grass. It's not addictive. It's not a drug. It's just natural. And it's true that the vast majority of people who use cannabis won't develop an addiction, just like the vast majority of people who will use alcohol won't develop an addiction. But there's a big minority of people who do happen to develop an addiction. Those are the folks who end up at addiction treatment centers. They're the ones who I would see. And so I went online just trying to help battle some of the myths around that, the nature of that addiction, how it's different than alcohol addiction, how it's different than opioid addiction, but it has its own kind of downside to it. So I started off online on that. Then I got online and I was like, holy shit, it's not just cannabis addiction, or cannabis myths, obviously. It's just misinformation everywhere. So then it just sort of got me interested in debunking mental health misinformation more generally. And people would email me all the time, DM me all the time, asking me like, Jonathan, is this treatment legitimate? Is this guy a quack? Is this article legitimate? And so doing that for about 5 years, and I've learned so much along the way. Like you said, I just wanted to compile all that information into this book to try to help people understand how to answer these questions for themselves, to help really just empower people and embolden people to take their mental health into their own hands so that they can just be more skeptical with claims that they see on the online world, because you're going to get Instagram influencers, wellness grifters, people selling you a bill of goods, so to speak, or pseudoscientific treatments with no training and no background. And that's concerning to me, because I think that's financially and emotionally exploitive for people, especially people who experience mental disorders like depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, I am really grateful to be talking to you about this today, because we have a couple of like legitimate current issues, right? Current issues when it comes to pseudoscience, or pseudoscience where science might meet a religious core belief, happening in your province right now. With Alberta Health Sciences, right? Where we talk about pseudo treatments like ivermectin, which is an anti-parasitic, which was a big funny deal during the pandemic, something that I watched you battle and battle and battle and battle. Well, you've got a premier in your province who was an ivermectin fan, if you will, and has effectively said that she's going to remove evidence-based running of hospitals in the province of Alberta, if I'm not mistaken. And feel free to clear me up, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong where I'm wrong, or provide clarity. But in favor of the core beliefs of different church groups, whether it be Catholics, whether it be a different third-party group like Covenant Health, to take over evidence-based treatment in hospitals and how they are run in favor of core belief-based treatments, or as I would term it in some cases, pseudoscience. Does that, like that, and that's a rocket ship going through the news of Canada right now. Like it is a major, major, major sign to a lot of different people in your profession in the province that you practice medicine in, that the pseudoscience is becoming mainstream.
Yeah, that's fair, and I find that concerning. I
no
find
shit.
That's my understatement.
Tell me how you feel about it, dude. Like, I've watched you be a warrior for evidence-based science. I've watched you fight the grifters, religion, where it tries to play a part in telling people to stay sick because it's their job or whatever, for whatever reason, any core belief system of any faith, doesn't matter what it is. But I mean, you're not just battling grifters and wellness, right? Like let's dig into that, and then we'll make our way through the book and what pseudoscience really is, because like I want your thoughts.
Like you said, I'm fighting ideology. I'm fighting narrative, and fighting how science has become politicized. And I find that it's extremely dangerous. One of the case, and I make this case in the book, it's like alternative medicine and sort of, the wellness industry and grift. It's not just a set of unsupported treatments or just a set of pseudoscientific treatments. Like, it's not just energy healing or homeopathy or naturopathy. It's this, like you said, it's an entire narrative, and it's an ideology that has its own themes and ideas, its own propaganda tactics. And the whole point of that is to sow distrust in mainstream medicine. And it needs that polarizing, divisive narrative to set itself against mainstream medicine because that's what's required to sell its grift, so to speak. And anyone can know this by just Googling a local alternative medicine website, because you'll see some of these tropes. Like you'll see something like, you'll see on their websites, you'll see words and languaging that says, unlike mainstream medicine who just cover the main symptoms or just treat, or they just mask the symptoms, we treat the root cause. But then when you dig deeper, you'll see that the root cause is a false cause. It's a pseudoscientific cause. It's like your unbalanced energy blockages, or it's a diet deficiency that is unsupported or pseudoscientific. And then they're going to sell you cures for that stuff. And so, yeah, it's that science and that narrative. So that pseudoscience and that narrative has become heavily politicized. And it's very concerning when it seeps and becomes baked into our healthcare systems at large. That is what I've been rallying against for, again, like you said, for 5 years, because I think ultimately that threatens patient care at the individual level and undermines public health at a population level.
What is, I'm a big fan of definitions. I think sometimes we motor through conversations with information after reading a book where you and I can have a conversation, but a lot of people might fall off on the side. What is pseudoscience to you?
Yeah, so pseudoscience, it's a loaded term, but I'll try to make it palatable.
Yeah.
So basically it's fake science. It's a hijacked attempt at doing science, but it's wrong. It's fake. And so in the history of philosophy of science, people have been wrestling with this problem about how to separate actual science from pseudoscience. That problem in the history and philosophy of science is known as the demarcation problem. It means, where do we draw the line or demarcate between science and pseudoscience? And the answer to that question is that there is no single criterion that tells us whether we've stumbled upon science or pseudoscience. Rather, there's a cluster or a constellation of warning signs, and the more warning signs that we see and that we hear, that tells us that we've unearthed something pseudoscientific. So, for example, some of those warning signs are things like elevating anecdotal evidence or testimonials saying this treatment works because Bob or Karen said so. It's having claims that are divorced from the scientific literature broadly. So, for example, energy healing will say that it's a treatment like Reiki will say that this treatment works because we all have human energy fields around us, and that can be manipulated and balanced with our hands.
Is that the chakra one? Is that the one where you see the videos online on social media, which always make me laugh, by the way, where someone's standing over someone on a massage table and they're pulling a pretend string, yes, and then their entire back goes into the downward dog or the scorpion, and you're like, wow, that is incredible. Is that what you're talking about? Is that energy healing?
Yes, that's exactly what that is. And
all right, always makes me laugh. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's another pseudoscientific warning sign. So
I figured.
All that to say, in my book, I got 9 of these warning signs, and so yeah, that's one of them. Just it's pure, it's fake science and it's grift. And then you mentioned something which is really kind of dangerous and insidious, is that the idea that there's these pseudoscientific journals. So that means there are journals that look like science.
They wrap them up in the same kind of like digital duotang that you would see, like a logo for a hospital. It's really just an organization, and then they'll make it look like. And dude, my favorite ones are the ones with all the peer-reviewed studies from people that are totally not capable of doing or reading a peer-reviewed study, right? Yes. Because a peer-reviewed study means a peer in the medical profession can read something that the layman cannot. Like someone without, and these are laymen that are like, I just read this peer-reviewed study, and I'm like, A, that's not a peer-reviewed study because you can clearly understand it, and B, it comes from the Department of Freedom and Education in some country in Europe, right? You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. So then you'll see studies that say things like demonic possession is a cause for schizophrenia, and it'll be wrapped up in a peer-reviewed journal. So like it has an introduction and a method section and like a discussion, and it's absurd. It's totally absurd. Or like there's another one that I write in the book.
Yeah, I want your favorites. That's what I want. I want like Dr. Jonathan Stea's greatest hits when it comes to the hilarity of wrapped up pseudoscience.
So my number one all time was the one I mentioned, the demonic possession for schizophrenia, and I'm happy I exposed that, and I'd like to think that I played some part in getting that article retracted, because it was eventually retracted, and I think it's because there was a lot of heat for it. There's another one that I mentioned is there's a journal called Explore, and this is a pseudoscientific journal, and it pretends to be a randomized controlled trial that evaluates whether people can send positive vibes, whatever the hell that means, to water and make its ice crystals look more beautiful. They're just sending vibes. So like, and this, again, it has a methods and a results section and a discussion. And then what that does, why it's so dangerous is that, you know, wellness grifters and alternative medicine practitioners can—
By the way, I'm laughing at this. It's not dangerous to me because I love these stories. Continue. So why it's so dangerous? Yes.
It's dangerous because grifters can then say, hey, look, I got a journal article that's supporting my bullshit, so to speak.
Yeah.
Here it's science. And for people that don't understand and they're not able to understand that that's pseudoscience and not science, that's what makes it dangerous. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to teach people what's called science literacy skills so that they can actually be able to tell that that's pseudoscientific bullshit, so to speak, and that it's not real science.
Yeah, triggers, right? Like you're trying to give people a little bit of a roadmap to go, hey, you can need to delineate or demark between what is evidence-based science and what is pure unadulterated bullshit wrapped up to look like science.
Yeah, because sending positive vibes to water to make it look beautiful is
not work. No, doesn't work. Can I share with you a couple of my favorites? These are the ones that I mocked more voraciously the most. Of course, ivermectin, knowing it's an anti-parasitic and doesn't do anything for your lungs. My God, that made me laugh for a solid 2 years. The dirt pills, the oxygenated mud bog dirt pills that people were selling. There's a Canadian dude that was selling. Did you see that? You see the dirt pill guy?
I probably did at one point. There's so many I can't even keep track.
What were some of your favorite elixirs? Oh, and the urine drinkers of Canada too. That was maybe one of my favorite Facebook stumbles over the past couple years.
There was a naturopath, which I wrote about in BC, and he was manufacturing pills made from his nephew's feces in his basement and selling it as a cure for autism. And it made mainstream news in Canada, and then he got disciplined for it. Thank God, because it was.
Was he a real doctor, or is he just some dude that was selling his?
He's a naturopath. He was a licensed naturopath. So the regulatory body of naturopaths had to discipline him. And then his lawyer, the best thing about this, because I call out a lot of naturopath in my book, because I think it's based on pseudoscience. So the lawyer said, well, how can we keep them accountable? Because the entire profession is based on pseudoscience. So they don't really have an argument to discipline him because the whole field is pseudoscience. So how can we say that what he's doing is wrong? So it was a fascinating take, but they did end up disciplining him, mostly because it was very unsafe. Like he was just doing it out of his basement with his nephew's feces to treat autism. Like it's just absurd.
What you're saying as a clinical psychologist and a professor, someone like a skilled medical professional with a PhD, you're saying that does not work. You cannot cure autism with poop. Is that what you're saying?
Not yet.
Imagine if one day we get to the point where we can, and that guy's like on his deathbed. It's like, I knew it.
Well, you know what, Dean? It's weird because there's a body of research that does they look at fecal transplants for the treatment of other conditions, but autism isn't there yet. And autism is a very contentious, like everyone purports to be able to treat and cure autism, and the fact is that I think when people say that, it's a very stigmatizing thing, and most often these treatments are incredibly dangerous, and they are backed by no evidence whatsoever.
So and let's kind of dig into that real quick if we can. Dr. Jonathan Stea is our guest. You can find him at Jonathan Stea on Twitter. Jonathan Stea has a website as well. His new book is called, and you should get it September the 3rd, depending on when you hear this. It's kind of the day I think it's coming out. September the 3rd, it's called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. We're talking about that podunk wellness industry right now. I always look for root cause. Like I should have been a doctor or a lawyer. I really should have, but I'm not smart enough for either. So here I am talking to you, trying to be one. But I always look for root cause, right? And so as we're sitting here talking about people who are submitting themselves to eating, poop pills to cure autism, dirt pills, drinking their own urine, that comes from desperation. It comes from somewhere, right? It comes from not having information, being brought up in a certain environment, believing that these things are true, or extreme resentment for real evidence-based science, right? Like that's what we see here. But in terms of the pre-context for that wellness industry, do you think that like there's a certain segment of people who are like, let's see if we can make people pay for poop pills and see how much money we can make, or are there factions who truly believe that drinking your own urine, eating dirt, and poop pills works?
It's both in a sense, and I in my experience, I like to think that the vast majority of these grifters, so to speak, are actually caring people that just want to make a living, and they do want to help people. And I think that they're grossly misinformed, and I think they're married to their pseudoscientific beliefs and their ideology. And I think that's what drives a lot of it. Of course, I think there's also malicious grifters out there who just do want to exploit people. But I think it's almost more dangerous when you get people that actually buy into their own pseudo-profound bullshit, so to speak. And we see that in the fringe industries as well, with even, and it's not just wellness grifters, it's fringe experts. You can have MDs and PhDs who are also working at the margins or the fringe, so to speak, who are peddling ideas that completely contradict the body of scientific evidence that we have and contradict the vast majority of experts that we have. And I think the vast majority of those folks actually believe it. And I think that in some ways that makes it more dangerous because it makes them more passionate.
Yeah, passionate because, maybe it's something they've experienced through whatever placebo effect that they might have had. Passionate because it aligns deeply with their core belief system. What do you fight more, right? That's the question I would have for you. And then I want to get to a profile of someone that, we've talked about the grifters, but the profile of someone who's susceptible to buying a dirt pill or eating ivermectin on a cracker. But like when you look at, well, I mean, let's be serious. It's paste, right? You can get it at the horse and tackle farm down the street. And they were out for like 2 years and they had to put signs up going, hey, this is for horses. Anyway, doesn't matter. But when you think about, not just the grift itself as you profile these individuals, but you also think about, trying to correct the record. What is it that, in the minds of these people who are susceptible to these things, what is it that they have in common, in terms of core beliefs, in terms of cognitive issues? It's kind of a nice way to say it. When you look at it from a psychological perspective, you profile some of the people that have been taken by this industry, that have had their wallets and their minds co-opted by the industry, where it's like it's us versus them. Big pharma's not out for your interests. Pills don't work. Just eat a steak and you'll get rid of a herniated disc in your back, or just anything that is not clearly not evidence-based. When you look at that, what are the commonalities and what are the things that you fight most in therapy with people who you're trying to help unwrap why they don't seem to trust evidence-based anything or experts now? Because to me, that's the biggest problem that we have, right? It's not just the disinformation. It's that disinformation that goes to a specific kind of person. And I want to know what that person is and how do you unwrap all that damage, or do you?
It's hard. And so, I'm not doing that in therapy per se. I mean, that's a different goal. And so my other hat is this science communication. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach people to kind of inoculate them or help protect them against this kind of misinformation. In terms of the profile that you mentioned, like who falls for misinformation and who falls for these kinds of pseudoscientific treatment, when you look to the psychology literature on it, it paints a very, as you might expect, a complicated picture. So it's not just any one particular variable, rather it's the interaction of these variables, and there's so many kind of at play. And to help me understand it, I think of it as kinds of there's individual level variables, so things within us, and then there's kind of social forces that kind of make it worse. And so the things within us, there's certain personality traits. So one is called openness to experience. So people that score high on this kind of personality trait or factor will be people that tend to be a bit more creative, out of the box thinkers, kind of sensation seeking in a sense. And again, it's people that score high on this won't necessarily fall for misinformation. It just places them more likely to do that in combination with other factors. So there's another personality variable called conspiracy mentality. So people who score high on this factor tend to endorse conspiracies, and And that's just one variable. There's another one called lack of intellectual humility, or its kind of converse is narcissism. That's another factor that comes in play. You mentioned one called mistrust. That's a huge one. People tend to mistrust institutions or people more than others. People that score higher on mistrust will also tend to fall for misinformation.
And you really see that in the bifurcation with experts versus non-experts, right? Like that's where I really see it, is in don't trust the experts. JD Vance, David Parker, who I know and actually like. We don't need your education. We don't need your expertise. We know exactly what we're doing. We're kind of coming back.
And there's a difference between two. Like these all fall on a spectrum. Like there's the odd person. We're all susceptible to misinformation. Like my friends or my family, someone may turn to energy healing because they think it'll help them, and they might believe it's true. But that person could be different than the person who becomes very extreme and married to their pseudoscientific beliefs. They've incorporated that into their identity. That's your freedom fighters, or the ones who are harassing me on social media every day because they've really become their beliefs in a way that's sort of detrimental. And so those are people that score really, really high. And, the people that I'm trying to reach in my book aren't those people. And the audience of the science communicator isn't what I call the ideologically possessed. It's sort of it's the general public who are just bombarded with mixed messaging all the time. And it's naturally hard to know what information to believe. And we all have these biases in our brains. We have these shortcuts that we think in shortcuts. And so the wellness industry itself capitalizes on these biases. So I'm just trying to help people, the everyday Joe, so to speak, kind of navigate that terrain. Then, of course, you have these people who unfortunately have become very, very far. They've almost become, they're extreme in their beliefs, and it's kind of overwhelmed them. Those people can come back from this stuff too, but that's a very tall order. And I think that takes a lot of work. And that's not what we're trying to do with the science communication level, is reach those folks. I think that's a different kind of beast, so to speak.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, you can probably suss this out in some of your personal relationships, maybe not so many in your professional relationships. Are those people who are, cognitively, purposefully divorced from reality, right? The reality of evidence-based treatment. But there's also a reality that hey, listen, I'm not too far off on when it comes to some alternative treatments in that Venn diagram where they're starting to touch evidence-based treatments, right? And it seems to me that that's another minefield for someone like you who really is an evidence-based guy. It's like, hey, listen, psilocybin is starting to, Johns Hopkins, there's a great study out of Johns Hopkins about psilocybin, hero doses when it comes to relief for people that have symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, depression, something that I dabble in, something that I have done, and I believe I have benefited from. Cannabis, I stopped drinking, haven't drank for really 7 years. That was cannabis that helped me sleep. I needed to get into a sleep cycle. And there are questions in my head, and you and I connect on evidence-based stuff. Like we connect on responsibility, accountability, doing the right thing for community when it comes to medicine during the pandemic. I believe we both had very, very similar perspectives, which made me feel good because you have all the education and I have none. I'm like, I'm just as smart as he is. But I've experienced some relief. Don't know if it's placebo effect relief. And you're starting to see some of the alternative treatments and alternative, think AA. I was in AA for 2 years, and I know that I've read your book. It's something that you place in that kind of a gray area, as opposed to evidence-based science. And I greatly benefited from it. And I, again, don't know if that's placebo effect, but I guess the question I'm getting at to you, because, I don't have the education you have. I know what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and I believe in it, and I support it, because evidence-based science, it doesn't care if you think it's true or not. It's still fucking true. And I truly do believe that. However, where I find that interesting is it almost gives the alternative wellness grifter crowd like a toe into evidence-based science, right? Where they're like, and then you add on what we clearly know, if you've seen any of the Sackler documentaries, you know anything about the opioid crisis, the distrust in big pharma. How do you navigate that when if you're in a normal conversation with a person like me who's like, okay, explain this to me because I've experienced alternative treatment and relief from it in a really wonderful way. Not into the woo woo when it comes to like the feathers and the smoke and stuff. And I have done a ceremony. I needed to go through the experience, really enjoyed it, believe I truly did benefit from it. And it's something I'm following up on a medical level. However, how do you navigate that right now as someone who has been very evidence-based and very hardcore about it for very good reasons?
Yeah, and I read your transformative experience, and I'm happy for you. I think that's really awesome, and that's what I would say to other people as well. I think my concern is that
walk me through it like I'm on your chair, like I'm laying back in a thing going, Dr. John, explain this to me, please.
Well, I wouldn't do that in a therapy session, though. This is sort of what I'm doing on the outside. But I hear you. So all evidence-based health professionals like me want people to get the best treatments. I'm excited about psychedelic treatment. I'm excited about the prospect of cannabis treatment. What we want is it to be done right. We don't want the cart put before the horse. And so what that means is we want good science around it. The reason it's in the gray zone in my book, so to speak, is because it's just been plagued with bad science. There's small sample sizes, there's people dropping out, there's mixed results. And so what we want to see as evidence-based health professionals is just better science so that it can cross the somewhat arbitrary threshold from alternative medicine to evidence-based medicine. That's what we're rooting for, and we need better science to do that. The problem is that in the wellness world, you're going to get people that overpromise, overhype, overgeneralize, and again, play into that narrative and undermine evidence-based treatment. So it's
one of those identifiers you were talking about, right? As far as how you can tell the difference or delineate between real science and bullshit.
Exactly. They'll hype it up. And so good evidence-based practitioners will be honest and forthright about what we know and what we don't, what the risks are for treatments and what the benefits are. And, we'll be honest about we don't know everything about mental illness and mental disorders, and our treatments are limited. We know that. When you turn to a pseudoscience grifter or promoter, they'll say something like, mainstream medicine doesn't know anything. We have all the answers. Here's our treatments. Here's all of the science that backs it up. And it's all fake.
Us versus them. Us versus them. Yeah.
Us versus them. And that's the grift. And I think that's deceptive and exploitive for people.
What do you make of, from what you've read of, and I'm interested on a personal level, obviously, psilocybin for relief of depression? What have you read? What are your thoughts? Do you have any evolving kind of impressions or first strokes that you want to share with me, because I'm fascinated by it?
Yeah, similarly, so it's one of those, it's not an unequivocal pseudoscientific treatment. So that warning sign that I said where it's divorced from the literature, that's not psilocybin. It actually could be plausible, and that's a good thing. So like I mentioned, I'm excited. I think it's a promising treatment. I'm just, based on the science that we have, it's not ready for prime time, so to speak, is kind of my concern. So, but that's not to say that it won't get there and that I don't want it to get there. We want that to happen. Again, it's just that the science has been plagued by, it's been bad. And so I'm grateful that, my own University of Calgary, I think there was a $3 million research fund to help study this stuff and its therapeutic potential. A neuroscientist, I think her name is Leah Mayo, is undertaking that. And, I'm excited for the bona fide research to come out so that it can be incorporated into clinical guidelines so that we can help people. The risk is that's why, evidence-based practice is part of our codes of ethics and our legal standards of practice, because if we jump the gun, so to speak, too much, it has the potential for harm, and we don't want to harm people as well. That's what we're saying here.
I totally get it. I mean, it's currently one of those unregulated fun markets, right? A lot of people have, they'll get baked on shrooms and, go pubbing with their friends and have a bunch of laughs. But man, there are significant issues. I've watched people completely spaz out, people that have had, unrelated mental health issues that, are undiagnosed. You don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know how you interact with the fungi. You don't know how you interact with whatever strain it is, to your point, right? And I think, some of the people that I work with, and I'll kind of take you through. So I microdose. And I microdose with psilocybin, and I do it with a company that I trust. It was a result of the what I believe was a retreat for the weekend to understand the science, where I went and did a hero dose, as they say, of psilocybin. And I had this incredibly transformative experience, wrote about it, and I appreciate you reading it. And it's an exploration, but it's an exploration that I'm doing with the advice of my psychiatrist, with the advice of my doctor, and it's cross-referencing all the time. I'm asking questions. I'm trying to get to know the science. I'm trying to get to know about neuroplasticity. I want my mind to work, and I want it to work and network as well as it has for my entire life. I want to be able to be present in the moment. And I've experienced these really cool transformative moments where it's not, and I think when a lot of people will ask me, what is it like? Well, explain it. Are you happy? And I'm like, well, generally I'm happy, but that's because I've done 2 years of AA. I've done 5-6 years of CBT. I'm real close to my psychiatrist and my psychologist. And so I have better tools to manage my life and stress. And so for me, this was like I want to optimize myself. I want to learn about what else I can do for myself. Does that make sense to you as a practicing psychologist, as a professor, as someone who understands the human mind, and someone who's a medical professional? Or is that something where you're like, no, alternative treatments, forget it, all of it, done?
No, I think you've done it in the right way possible. I think if it were to be, that's respecting patient autonomy. What do we say? I mean, people are free to do that. And I think that the best way to approach these things is to do it as part of an evidence-based treatment team, like you said, in the context of psychologists, psychiatrists. And, it's not just people going and doing shrooms and kind of self-medicating. You're doing it in a very thoughtful, intentional way, knowing that you have a care team who knows your background, they've done proper mental health assessments, they kind of know what your potential risks and benefits could be. I think that's the optimal, ideal kind of way to do it. And so I'm happy for that. And I've heard great stories. So again, that makes me really optimistic about it because, like I said, all of our evidence-based treatments are imperfect. They don't work for everyone. And so we want to have better treatments. We want to have a better arsenal of evidence-based treatments. Again, we just want it to be done right. Yeah. I'm hopeful and optimistic that will become a thing. But again,
I thought you would give me a little evidence-based slap across the face here today. I'm really happy. You're like, no, good for you. You're doing it right. You're consulting. You're doing all the stuff.
And you said you put in a lot of other work too. You had a lot of psychotherapy. CBT is great stuff. You said AA, which I'll kind of return to as well, because I did put that in the gray zone. But I recommend to all of my patients, I help people with addiction, that they do seek peer support services, whether it's 12-step programs like AA. There's other peer support services like Smart Recovery, which is kind of CBT based. All of that is kind of great. AA, the reason I put it in the gray zone is because it's such an umbrella term. Like AA can work amazingly well for some people, and for some people it can hurt them just in certain ways. And usually it tends to be some of the folks who have something like an opioid use disorder, which is like heroin or fentanyl or something like that, where one of our first line treatments are what we call opioid agonist therapies. So they'll take things like methadone or Suboxone, which are actually medications. But when you get, some people are so militant in AA that they can become against medications, and so that can hurt someone. And so that's why it's kind of gray. There's a lot of benefits.
There's a lot of God in AA too, right? Yeah. There's a lot of like, hey, don't worry, just give it to him. He'll take it away. And I'm like, I grew up with that. Yeah. That doesn't work.
Some people don't resonate, with that spiritual component. And
I didn't.
But the research finds that, the power of AA really lies in the power of the group and
community. Yeah. Well, so you know what it was for me? You talk about it quite a bit in your practice. I've heard you talk about it quite a bit in podcasts. I listened to a couple of them over the past couple of days just prepping for this. And it's all of it, right? It's not one specific thing, but more importantly, the all of it that really stuck with me was community, right? It's interaction, it's engagement, it's positive experiences with people that have figured out how to respond well to that dilemma in their life, and you're coming along with them for that ride. And you might pick out different things. I'm a big believer in AA. I really am, for people, in as much as it's like an interdictive, if that's a word, treatment for people who it's almost like, when you go there, it's you conducting your own intervention. That's like last line of defense prior to rehab, prior to someone else and their family coming around you in a room saying, hey, you need to go, We need to, because we can't live with you like this. That's AA to me was like you saying, I need to go. I need to figure this out. I need to humble myself. But there are psychological triggers in AA where I'm like, that's not good for anybody. That's not good for anybody. And of course, the God element, which, I just never resonated with me because I always found everything like that to be woo-woo. Again, it's not evidence-based. Nothing in religion is really evidence-based at all.
Right. Yeah, so every single one of my patients that come through our clinic, I always recommend peer support services. And I tell them, like, there's AA, which is 12 steps. There's, again, Smart Recovery, which is CBT based. There's something called Dharma Recovery, which is more Buddhist kind of mindfulness based. I tell them, I don't care which support service you seek. Like, go whichever one resonates with you. Do you like the Buddhist mindfulness stuff? Do you like the CBT stuff? Or do you like the 12-step philosophy? Because I want you to get that power of community and the power of the group. And that's what we kind of encourage. It's that group. And so like I said, some people will resonate with different aspects of it. You get hardcore 12-steppers, as they say, hardcore AA people, and it's worked wonders for them. And I'm so happy for those folks. But then and at the same time, I get people that it makes them feel worse. So I said, well, let's try something different.
What's interesting is that, prior to me discovering Stoicism and CBT, that was my journey, right? It was like AA was all encompassing, and you had everybody in those rooms go, no, this is the only thing you need. It's like you come in, you put your $2 in a basket. That's your counseling. I'm like, I don't think it works like that. But what was interesting for me is the role of philosophy in my life and how that led me into cognitive behavioral therapy because of Stoicism, which is the philosophy that I love. I study it. I love it. I study the Stoics. And CBT is literally the root of CBT is Stoicism, right? It just is. It's one of those really weird experiences I've had where I'm like, my God, I love the quotes. It's like life has become a quote or a cliche and everything kind of originates from being able to control yourself, right? Being able to make that next right decision. And we've seen a real demolishing of agency on behalf of people in regards to disinformation and misinformation, where they give their agency away to other people. Right? They give their agency away to podunk treatments. They give their agency away to influencers. And I've watched people in your space, right? And I'm going to bring up a name. You don't have to comment on it. And I'm not going to play this emotionally. I'm just not a fan of Jordan Peterson. But in your profession, as someone who takes evidence-based science, not doing any more harm with their words, according to your professional standards, and watching you fight as you fought for the past, I don't know how many years, 5 years. And then you've got a guy that has the same credentials in Jordan Peterson who's saying completely the other thing, talking about a fight between heaven and hell, talking about, gender fluidity being a butcher's game, talking about all kinds of bullshit that he's not supposed to talk about, but he can't help himself. And the damage that man has done, in my estimation, to young men over the past several years with negativity, victim blaming, meaning it's everybody else's fault, passing responsibility. He does the opposite of what he was taught to do according to his profession, in my estimate. And you do all the things you were taught to do because you hold yourselves to ethics and professional standards. How dangerous, from your professional lens, are people like that in this ecosystem?
I'm going to come back to Jordan in a second because I think you're going to find it super interesting. But what I want to go to first, though, is because you mentioned kind of a parallel between CBT and kind of navigating the disinformation space. And I think that's huge because Stoicism and CBT, the philosophy of it is really about trying to tune into our own personal biases. In CBT language, it's called cognitive distortions. We all have distortions. It filters the way that we see the world. Those distortions are often filtered by things like depression and anxiety. They kind of filter the way that we see the world. And so in CBT, we're trying to take off those biased lenses and see a more kind of complete, realistic, balanced picture of reality. And that's what's therapeutic. And
from an accountable perspective, right?
Yeah,
right.
And from accountable, it's supposed to engender agency. And I think a parallel process is happening there too with what we try to do as science communicators, is where, again, all of our brains are kind of wired for shortcuts and heuristics, and we're all biased. And so the CBT approach, or the science communication approach, so to speak, is to become more analytical and to pause, look at accuracy, don't go on gut instincts, and to kind of step back and analyze the information space. And so that's a helpful thing for kind of combating misinformation and disinformation. It derives from the work of Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in economics. He distinguished between these two thinking styles that we have: this intuitive thinking style, which is very effortless and quick and gut instinct, and then this more analytical, deliberated, effortful part of our thinking style.
Feeling versus thinking brain. Yeah, feeling versus thinking. Yeah.
Research shows when people rely on that intuitive system, back to that profile, they're more likely to fall for misinformation. So CBT, in a sense, like we're almost CBTing the world of misinformation, and that can be a helpful thing. Back to Jordan, you'll find this interesting. You may or may not know. So I grew up in the Toronto area, as I mentioned, and I went to the University of Toronto. He was my undergraduate supervisor in the University of Toronto.
How was he? Can I ask you a couple? Was he like this then?
Dean, I want to be honest. So I was in my early 20s. I was a young guy then, and I wasn't a quote unquote expert then. I didn't know anything about psychology. Here I am, a young man in Toronto, taking these new psychology classes, and I'll be honest, I was enthralled. He was a very charismatic guy. This is before he blew up, right? This is over a decade.
Yeah, he's a brown bag professor, right? He's just a dude. Yeah.
He taught at Harvard. He went to McGill University, which is an amazing university with an amazing clinical psychology program. He worked under Robert Peel, who was a great researcher in and of himself. He had a great research track record. I volunteered in his lab, and he was publishing in great personality journals. He had an H index of over 50, which is it's just a metric for how you evaluate academic performance, and his was really great. And so he kind of knew the confines of psychology. He knew what he was doing in that kind of area. And so I was very, like I said, enthralled and very biased. We're all kind of biased. And so I've defended him publicly kind of years ago through all of that. And then at some point, it became too much. There was a lot of just anti-trans rhetoric that I saw. There was a lot of anti-vaccine rhetoric. There was fat-shaming women, like kind of plus-size models.
He's fucking mean. He got mean.
Yeah, on Sports Illustrated. And at some point, like I said, we're all susceptible to biases. And then there was just enough of that kind of rhetoric that kind of broke me free from my shackles, so to speak. And I regret supporting him publicly in the past, because I think that what he's doing now is harmful. And that's just my personal opinion. So I find it very sad, because, I had a connection, I had a personal connection with him when I was an undergraduate student, again, in my early 20s. And so I just find it, I find it sad, because I think that's happened to a lot of kind of people too, where they started out kind of knowing their stuff, and then they just drifted, I think, beyond their scope, and for whatever reason just became, they kind of went in an opposite direction. There's other names which I won't mention, but you kind of see similar things where people started out very well, and then they became leaders in the anti-vaccine movement. It's like, how the hell did this guy
was that an opportunity, a choice of opportunity in your mind for a guy like Jordan, or does he really believe that he's not subject to the same, professional standards everybody else is? That you can eat a steak and cure a herniated back, like all the crazy, hellfire and brimstone bullshit. Is that in your opinion, is that an opportunity for him, or is that, is there a psychological diagnosis? You look at a guy like that and you go, it might be a number of these 5 things.
I honestly, Dean, I don't know. I haven't talked to him in years, and I can't comment on his motivations for it. I would just say that I don't like the recent rhetoric, and I think it's harmful. Like I said, sort of the anti-vaccine stuff, anti-trans stuff, and again the fat shaming women. It just makes me sad.
Yeah, it's not something, and my understanding is that when you become a psychologist or psychiatrist, your job is to not do any more mental harm, and that is mental harm on a nuclear level with 5.5 million followers on social media and another 5.5 million people that subscribe to your YouTube channel. It just, it makes sense to me from a professional ethics standards standpoint. But, it kind of leaps into the other stuff, which is, the damage that influencers like him, Andrew Tate, Alex Jones, who sells more fake brain powder than any guy on the planet, like to the tune of $200 to $300 million a year.
Elon Musk.
I mean, take me through your thoughts on, because, Pavel Durov, Telegram, he got arrested the other day, conducting criminality behind the idea that, hey, free speech is free speech. I'm not going to give you any data. But that being said, the influencers that do peddle lies, disinformation, where it comes to a mental and emotional awareness, like how have you seen, were you prepared for this as a psychologist, psychiatrist, someone, who's just kind of leapt into the last 4 years with everybody else, or did this broadside you like everybody else? And how dangerous is it?
Yeah. Hell no. I had no idea this was coming. Like when I was a graduate student and kind of during my training, working in hospital settings and kind of helping people, it's really just the last 5 years that we went online and just saw this proliferation of misinformation. It exploded.
And some of it's so unbelievable that, like, you don't need to have a medical degree to go, that's bullshit.
Yeah, we're not even talking about we're not talking about those gray zone cases like AA, cannabis, psilocybin, where, there's good research that's going to be done there. We're talking about things like Andrew Tate saying depression isn't real, or Elon Musk saying things like antidepressants do more harm than good, or people saying that COVID-19 was a hoax, or that that COVID-19 vaccines are killing people more people than they help. Like, these are they're conspiracy laden claims that are just so obviously wrong that and it's dangerous when, like you said, influencers are tweeting and posting to a platform that reaches hundreds and millions of people. It's very dangerous. I mentioned this before, but it capitalizes on a psychological phenomenon that we call the illusory truth effect, which again kind of derives from Daniel Kahneman's work, which is just the idea that our brains aren't good at differentiating familiarity with the truth, meaning that if we see enough misinformation repeated over and over and over, our brains are wired to believe that.
Sure.
And that's not good. We need to override that kind of instinct, and that can be hard for people that don't know. So it's incredibly dangerous when this stuff is being spouted over and over. I mentioned that in my own realm of mental health, I was fortunate to be part of a study that I wrote in my book where we analyzed the top 1,000 videos with the hashtag mental health on TikTok. And we found that when we analyzed these videos where people are giving advice and information about mental health, we found that about 33% of those videos are misleading, but you can see the reach of these videos, and they were viewed over 1 billion times. So over 1 billion times people are seeing misleading videos. And so again, that worries me with respect to this illusory truth effect, because there's so much misinformation that is baked into our culture now.
How much have you seen, and I won't keep you for much longer. I really appreciate you being here. I want to talk about the effect this has had on you to end, and I also want to talk about what you're seeing, in clinic, what you're seeing in therapy, what you're seeing from people. I'm fortunate enough that I do a little bit of coaching on the side. I coach guys when it comes to alcohol abuse, when it comes to response therapy. And in no way, and this is just people that have come to me in the past and me upskilling in my own life, which I won't get into because it pales in comparison to your resume. But I see a noted difference in people in confusion, what they understand to be true, how they cope with it with drugs and alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to get to that. but more importantly, how are you doing? Because, you know, you and I share the same stalkers and people that deliver death threats, right? And it takes a toll. Like, I just finished taking 3 months off because I was burnt out. I needed to organize my thoughts. I needed to get some treatment. I needed to understand myself. I needed to decide what was next in my life, and this is it. Doing the right things for the right reasons, trying to help people understand things, having an open mind, but being responsible and accountable, and being fun when we do it. So, but, you know, this manifested itself in, and I've seen it in you, and you've been honest about, you know, the effect that this has had on you. Because psychologists and psychiatrists aren't just bulletproof because they're psychologists and psychiatrists. So how has this manifested itself in your life, you continually trying to do the right thing, and the beatdown that we both have experienced and continue to experience when it comes to just trying to help people understand shit?
Totally. And at this point, since Elon Musk took over X, you know, for the past year,
way worse?
So,
yeah,
way worse. I literally get at least 100 abusive messages a day. Literally, I'm not exaggerating that number across my platforms. And so, yeah, I mean, initially, I've been
abusive for me, or quantify it.
Death threats, cyber stalking, people taking my photos and, you know, manipulating them and saying, like, just personal attacks, attacking credentials, attacking character.
This one too. I'm gonna bring this one up. Yeah,
that's a funny one though.
Some guy with triumphant anniversary, your new book comes in, Mind the Science. You're like, hey, my new book's coming out.
3 years in the making, and it's covered by some testicles. So
get points for creativity, though.
Yeah. So there's that, and then there's actually, you know, there's been fake complaints to my university, fake complaints to my regulatory bodies. So this stuff, you know, they're meant to harm. It's meant to have a chilling effect and to silence people, and it's chased a lot of really good people off social media, like Peter Hotez, who's back now, but he's a champion of public health. So people, you
guys had a mutual tweet admiration thing this morning. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, thank you. Guys were showing up at his house, and Elon Musk was attacking him, and RFK Jr. So, like, you know, he gets it probably the worst I've ever seen anyone have harassment. But yeah, you know, how I cope with it. Like you said, we're all human. I am blessed and kind of fortunate in the sense that, you know, I do happen to have an arsenal of coping skills. So I'm able to emotionally regulate. I'm able to tolerate it. I've also been well practiced at dealing with the shit, so to speak, for about 5 years. So, you know, it's part of the process for me now. And I like to help other people who are kind of going through it and try to help them depersonalize or not taking it personally, because, you know, the person who put testicles on my photo there, you know, he doesn't know who I am. He's attacking a cartoonish version of who he thinks I am, or an idea of who he thinks I represent. And so I'm very good at kind of, you know, using humor to kind of laugh this stuff off, because I don't take it personally. I don't let it penetrate my self-esteem, so to speak. But that's had to take practice, and, you know, it takes active work at using coping skills, and not everyone has that ability, and I feel for them, and it sucks. And so I do like to call it out when I see it, and I like to make it a point to draw attention that science communicators in general do get this kind of harassment, and health professionals and others. And so I don't think it's acceptable, but I think it's an important area that people need, I guess, more training just to tolerate it and manage it, because it's a you know, you and I are by no means the only ones. This is happening across the world for people that do it. There was a survey in one of the top medical journals in Nature, and it surveyed, there was tons of health professionals and scientists that are receiving death threats and abuse like that. So yeah, that's how I'm coping. I personally like to use a tad of humor to try to spin it in a way that also kind of that helps to debunk misinformation, but that's my own unique style, and that's not for everyone. And I get how it's not for everyone, because it can be very discombobulating for people.
Oh yeah, totally. You know, and I've had to change my tack, because, as you know, I can go for the throat. And I'm a big fan of going for the throat. My theory is, why fuck around in the middle when I can go right to the end? And so that's generally what I do. But, you know, there's a higher purpose and responsibility, I find, as a human being trying to, you know, contribute discourse. Marcus Aurelius said it best. You know, fruit of this life is being of good character and acts for the common good. And if we're going to continually cut people's legs off, you know, and there's a difference between bots and abuse and someone just asking a question, right? And so, you know, it's very, very different. But I always like to ask guys like you how you deal with stress when it comes to this kind of stuff, because this kind of stuff sends a lot of people to the hospital, right? Like, I mean, it's just continually being inundated with negativity, threats, And at some point, your inner self, or that imposter that sometimes lives in all of us, is like, you can start asking those questions of yourself if enough of it comes in, right? Where you're like, am I really a quack, or am I really a third-rate hack journalist? Am I really these things other people say? But to your point, and again, I go back to this, and this is the beauty of philosophy and CBT, is one of the great quotes of all time, which is something that was driven into my head by one of my mentors, Donald J. Robertson, who wrote a book called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. Is a quote by Epictetus, and it's like, you wouldn't give, if someone tried to give your body to a passerby, you'd be furious, but you willingly give your minds to those people. You willingly hand over your wellness, your agency, your mental and emotional agency to people through resentment and anger. And if you ask me, and I want your opinion on this, the biggest mental health issue that we see every day is that, specifically from this community. It's, we are out of control. There's a political answer. Someone's going to come along and fix our problems. There's a dirt pill or a poop pill answer. It's someone's promising that they can do this for us. And I am so desperate, and I am so depressed, and I've experienced so much trauma as an individual, that I'll give all that agency over to people. And you can't control yourself in those capacities because you've given your minds to somebody else. Do you see that a lot in the people that come in? Their confusion is derived from them giving their mental and emotional agency away?
I think in part, I think there's so many factors at play. I think that is huge. I think people are just, again, bombarded by misinformation. I think people... So I mentioned that individual profile. So there's personality traits that leave people susceptible to misinformation. There's also the social level that I wanted to mention as well. So we're preyed upon by bad actors, so to speak. I mean, RFK Jr. has got his Children's Health Defense, which is literally targeting people with misinformation about the nature of, anti-vaccine stuff. Wellness influencers are doing that. So there's actual bad actors. The algorithms of social media itself is biased against us. So it's looking for emotion-laden, oversimplified headlines that, again, just are devoid of any nuance or any gray or any discussion. And so people come to therapy sessions just confused. I'll have people come who think, they're anti-big pharma, or they're scared of taking psychiatric medications, or they don't know if mental illness is real or not because they've read it online. And so, it hurts me as a clinician to see that crap already adding to the burden of their mental health concerns.
Yeah, well, that's because you're a good doctor. That's why. That's because you are a responsible individual who gives a shit about the human experience and the human being. And dude, let me say this. Really glad you finally took me up on the offer. I have really enjoyed spending an hour chopping it up with you, trying to get to the bottom of, a professional's opinion on misinformation, disinformation. By the way, those are two different things, right? Disinformation is intentional. Misinformation, it's one of those studies that's wrapped up in like a cool looking peer-reviewed journal. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you can identify what the truth is from a lie when it comes to your wellness and your medical well-being. And Dr. Jonathan Stea is one of those bright lights in the dark sky. I would highly encourage everybody to go get his book. September the 3rd is when it drops. You can order it anywhere, including Amazon, jonathanstea.com. No H in Jonathan. Well, there is after the T, but not after the O. He's tired of mental health information, pseudoscience that pervades healthcare, pop culture, social media, the wellness industry. He wrote a book about it, Mind the Science, when it comes to your mental health, coming September the 3rd, 2024. And dude, a pleasure to talk to a fellow Calgarian. I miss the West. Not right now, but I do miss the West. I miss the geography and the people. Maybe one of the most beautiful places in the world for me is Calgary. And as a University of Calgary alum, nice to see you. Go Dinos. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Dean. My pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Jonathan Stea for joining us. That was awesome. I love that guy. So calm. That's what happens when you learn to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, and you're professional. And your job is to make everybody else around you calm and understand things. He's very good at explaining. Good thing he's a professor. Thanks, John, for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our friends. Thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget, everything we do, you can find at the Crier Media YouTube site. You can get us anywhere you get podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc. The Dean Blundell Show. Please rate, subscribe, review. Please leave your thoughts and comments. And interact with Dr. John here. His website is here as well. Order his book. You can get that in the description of this podcast. And thanks to our friends at Moment Mushrooms for making this possible again. Hey, listen, psilocybin's a thing. The Venn diagram, you heard it. Touches medicine responsibly. Look into psilocybin treatment. Educate yourself about microdosing. Go to momentmushrooms.com. Again, momentmushrooms.com. Check out all of their education and what you can do for your mental health, whether it's relief from PTSD, whether it's relief from anxiety, stress, post-traumatic stress disorder is a big thing. I got it. Everybody else has got some stuff. We all got stuff. And you go on this journey, and that is my journey, and that is where it took me. I trust them. You can too. Check them out today. Educate yourself. Go to momentmushrooms.com. And brought to you by our friends at Cheese Boutique. If you haven't been to Cheese Boutique, you can online. And it's so easy to do. They've got gift cards. They've got different offers and opportunities for you to experience maybe one of the coolest shopping, gourmet, luxury experiences you'll ever have. And they do all kinds of stuff for the community. They got a cheese vault, a market, bodega. They got catering, food truck, events. And coming soon, Crier Media, the home to the Cheese Boutique Afram Pristine podcast. Yeah, that's right. That's right. You haven't lived till you've gone to Cheese Boutique. They've got everything. They've got a market, vault, catering. Like I said, it's where I go and spend my weekends. They've got this really cool alleyway where you can go and have lunch as well. They own basically a whole street downtown Toronto. Visit them online today, cheeseboutique.com. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being part of the podcast. Don't forget to rate and review. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.